Hello, I'm Olivia Mattis. Delighted to welcome you today on behalf of the Sousa Mendes Foundation to the telling of a really important story from World War II of an untold, unsung hero, or let's say not sufficiently sung hero. Thankfully, we have this beautiful film that you all watched called Khaled. We are blessed to have with us the filmmaker Emmanuel Berabi. He is a French-Israeli filmmaker. He's joining us from Israel. Our thoughts are with Emmanuel and all of our brothers and sisters in Israel right now as they go through what they're going through. And so it's amazing that he's with us here today. He will be our first speaker. Following Emmanuel Berabi, our second speaker today will be Mr. Saul Weisel. Saul lives in California. He is the son of one of the people saved by the hero we're honoring today, by Khaled Abdul Wahab. His mother was Eva Weisel, and he will tell you his story. Saul will tell you his story and his mother's story. So I'm very excited for that. And our third speaker today is our resident historian, our resident expert, Dr. Mordechai Paldiel, that many of you know. He was for 24 years at Yad Vashem as the director of the Department for the Righteous. He has been fighting for years to have Yad Vashem honor Khaled Abdul Wahab. The nomination first came up after Mordechai left Yad Vashem, but he's been working from the outside to try to get Yad Vashem to honor him, which has not yet happened. And he will be talking a bit about that and so much more. If you're interested in learning more about Khaled Abdul Wahab or any of the other stories of the Nazi occupation of North Africa and some of the heroes there, several of our speakers are mentioning a book. It's this book by Robert Satloff called Among the Righteous, Lost Stories from the Holocaust's Long Reach into Arab Lands. And you can get this book on Amazon or wherever you buy books. So if you want to learn more, I highly recommend that you order it. So that's it for my introduction. And I'm going to turn the floor over to our first speaker. I guess I do need to tell you that you're all remaining muted. If you do have questions, please type them out into the chat box. We will get to as many of your questions as we can later in the hour. So just keep typing them in as they come to you. Type them into that chat box. And now, without further ado, let's hear from Emmanuel Berabi, the filmmaker, our first speaker. Emmanuel, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Olivia. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. It's always a pleasure when a film has its journey around the world and a lot of people are getting the chance to see it, especially the amazing story of Khaled. So, my name is Emmanuel Berabi. I'm a producer and a creator and the co-founder of B Films, a production company based in Tel Aviv. I'm in Tel Aviv right now. I will tell you a little bit about how how we got the idea for the film, and where it all started. And it started from a very personal place. So, as Olivia mentioned before, my parents are originally from Tunisia. I was born in Israel, but my parents from both sides are from Tunisia. So here you can see the map, and you can see where Tunisia is in relation to Europe and its neighboring North Africa countries. My mother's family comes from the capital, Tunis. This is the largest city in Tunisia, the country's main center of commerce and trade, and the place where the largest Jewish community in Tunisia lived. My father's family comes from the city of Sfax. It's a beautiful coastal city on the Mediterranean. And our story, the story of Khaled, happening just in between them, in the coastal city of Mahdia, a small town, and next to it, the olive farm in Tlersa. So before I continue, I would like to take a pause and to see a video from the film, giving a sense of the Jewish life in Tunisia before the war.
Over the course of research I found two other women that testified to what Khaled had done.
Je m'appelle Edmé Gmara Uzan Matsia. Je suis née à Mahdia le 11 novembre 1931. Donc tu fais le compte, j'ai 90 ans depuis quelques jours. Mahdia, c'était un tout petit village. Il y avait une communauté juive, mais qui vivait comme on vit en 1931, c'est-à-dire très soudée. Donc notre vie, elle était réglée par le Shabbat. Mon père allait à la synagogue, bien sûr. Et nous, les enfants, ma mère nous habillait belles et on allait à la synagogue. Et ma mère, elle montait en haut chez les femmes et nous, on était partout. Et j'ai le souvenir de mon père qui lisait toujours la même prière, la prière que l'on lit quand on ouvre le Sefer, quand on arrive à la porte du Sefer. C'était Imlou, Adonai Elohim. C'était mon père avec sa petite voix. Et j'ai toujours ce souvenir, et même maintenant, à mon âge, quand je vais à la synagogue et que j'entends ça, j'entends mon père. Mes parents s'appelaient Moïse Uzan et ma mère s'appelait Livia Bokobza. Jacob et Odette Boukris, c'était des grands amis de mes parents. Jacob, il avait une station d'essence sur le port, près du port. Et souvent, le samedi, quand on allait, la station était fermée, bien sûr, mais on prenait des chaises et on s'asseyait là-bas au bord de l'eau, sur la station d'essence de tonton Jacob.
So it's amazing every time I see it. So I'm thinking about my own family because I have like 6 aunts that look exactly the same and speak exactly the same and dress exactly the same, like Edme, wonderful woman. And the stories and memories I grew up hearing from my family were quite similar to what Edme is telling in the film. Always warm memories, sweet memories of the life in Tunisia. They lived during the period of the French protectorate, and the French language was an inseparable part of everyday life. Many Jews were educated in French institutions, such as the schools of the Alliance, which played an important role in the Jewish education across North Africa. As Edme were saying, and at that time, the Jewish communities in Tunisia enjoyed a relatively high degree of religious freedom and economic participation. Synagogues were active and open. Jewish religious life was visible, and communities organized themselves around schools, charities, and religious institutions. Jewish communities also had their own newspapers and cultural institutions, reflecting a vibrant intellectual and communal life. Mosques and synagogues existed throughout the same cities and towns, and religious life was part of public landscape. In many places, Jews and Muslims live in close proximity. While some cities had traditional Jewish quarters, daily life often brought the communities together in the same streets, marketplace, and workplace. Jews and Muslims frequently worked together in commerce and crafts, spoke the same local Arabic dialect, and knew one another personally, especially in smaller towns like Mahdia, where our film is happening, where community were closely connected. So as I told you, the memories and the stories I heard was quite similar to what's happening in the film. So it's different places in Tunisia, but it's the same people, the same stories, the same pictures. As you can see in the first picture, these are my grandparents from my father's side. And you are not mistaken, this is not Jacob and Odette Boukris, although it looks exactly the same if you saw it in the clip before. But you can get a hint about how the life in Tunisia was was a habit, I think, today to do those photos. Um, the next one is the family getting bigger in the 1930s. So this is in Sfax. You can see how they dressed. They're not as maybe some of you would imagine people in Tunisia looking alike, but you can see it's quite modern. I guess it's the French protectorate, and they're living under speaking French, so they look modern. Here you can see my father, 1 year old, several months before the Nazi occupation started in Tunisia. So here they're still smiling. And this is my father in his bar mitzvah. They had a nice event around it, and it's still connected to the religious freedom that they had there. And it's really ideal life between Muslims and Jewish. So I love imagining it, especially now in those days that we're living. It seems like a dream, but it really happened, and to think that we're not so far from each other. But this ideal world was shaken during the Second World War. After the fall of France in July 1940, Tunisia came under the authority of the Vichy France, and anti-Semitic laws were introduced. Jews were removed from certain professions, their rights were restricted, and discrimination against Jewish communities increased. On November 8, 1942, the Allies launched Operation Torch, landing in Morocco and Algeria and opening a new front in North Africa. Within days, the German and Italian forces moved quickly into Tunisia to prevent the Allied control of the country and practically to block them. This marked the beginning of the Tunisian campaign of the Germans, and Tunisia became the only territory in the Arab world to experience direct Nazi military occupation. I mean, SS soldiers walking in the streets. During this period, thousands of Jewish men were forced into labor battalions. Jewish communities were subject to heavy financial fines, and property was confiscated. It was during these months, in December 1942, that the rescue actions of Khaled Abdul Wahab began. The occupation finally came to an end on May 13, 1943, when Allied forces captured the city of Tunis and Bizerte, and the German and Italian armies in Tunisia surrendered. So these events were not just history for me and for my family. They were personal, and I heard those stories and I kept asking about them. And there's one particular, maybe small story regarding others, especially regarding the story of Khaled, but it was always amazing for me to know that it happened like that. My father, as I told you before, was only 1 year old at the time, and he was carried in my grandmother's arms. As prosecution testified, my grandfathers decided they could not stay in Sfax. Jewish men were being taken for forced labor, homes and property were sometimes confiscated, and daily life became extremely uncertain. So my family packed a few belongings and some food, left their homes in a haste on a horse-drawn carriage, and eventually found temporary refuge on a farm in the countryside. They lived there in very difficult conditions throughout the occupation. I mean, no food, no incomes, no hygiene. It was very difficult, and they all lived together in a small room. And because of the poor hygiene and the harsh living conditions, my aunt, Liliane, who was 6 years old at the time, contracted typhus and came very close to death. Now she's celebrating her 90th birthday. So we're happy that she survived that. So growing up with those stories, I assume that extraordinary events must also have taken place in Tunisia during that time. And that is how I eventually encountered the remarkable story of Khaled Abdul Wahab. What I love most about this story is that it constantly breaks stereotypes. It surprises you again and again. Life in Tunisia is not what many people imagine, like we saw in the photo before. The people do not necessarily look the way stereotypes suggest, and the relationship between Jews and Arabs can be far more complex and sometimes far more hopeful than people expect. For centuries in Tunisia, Jews and Muslims lived side by side. They shared languages, markets, neighborhoods, and daily life. In places like the coastal town of Mahdia, where this story taken place, communities were small and closely connected, and people often knew one another personally. And it is precisely in this context that the story becomes even more remarkable. Perhaps the most surprising part of this story is the figure of Khaled Abdul Wahab himself. He was a young man, handsome young man, who wanted to see the world. He had experienced cities like Paris and New York. He was elegant, charismatic. He loved life, people, and social gatherings. Yet, under the watchful eyes of his father, he eventually had to return to his hometown. And in the end, it was precisely that personality, his independence, his courage, and his sense of responsibility that led him to act. He chose to protect his Jewish neighbors and even managed to deceive German officers in order to save them. Khaled Abdel Wahab is truly an extraordinary figure, almost difficult to believe, and as you have all seen in the film, his story reminds us how unexpected courage can appear in the darkest moments of history. That's it for me. And now, Sol, Weisel.
Hello, thank you, thank you. I'm so pleased to be part of this event today, and my name is Saul Weisel, as Olivia introduced me before. I'm the son of a Sephardic mother and Ashkenazi father, Eva Boukris and Ted Weisel. I was born in Mahdia, Tunisia, in December 1947, and 3.5 years later, our small family immigrated to the United States, arriving at Ellis Island in May 1951. But it wasn't until I was close to about 60 years old that I learned about a Tunisian Arab by the name of Khaled Abdul Wahab, a man who profoundly affected the future of the Boukris family during World War II, and thereby affected my own existence, really. My knowledge of this man and the story of his protecting my mother and her family from the Nazis came about from my Aunt Annie, my mother's younger sister. She was 11 years old and my mother 13 at that time. It wasn't a story my mother told me or my sister and brother while we were growing up. You know, just as many parents sometimes who were in danger or traumatized during the Holocaust didn't share their memories with their children. But before I go any further into this story, I'd like to show you the faces of my immediate family who were protected and saved by Khaled. I'm sorry. The eldest of the clan is my great-grandmother, Eva Boukris, and next to her is her daughter and my grandmother, Odette Boukris, and then my grandfather, Jacob Boukris, followed by my mother, Eva, my aunt Annie, and my uncle Guido. There were other relatives on my great-grandmother's side from the Uzan family who were also under Khaled's protection. For me, the revelation of Khaled's saving my family from the Germans occurred in late 2006 when Robert Satloff's book, Among the Righteous, was published. And totally unaware, my mother learned from my cousin Nadia, Annie's daughter, about the book and that it had a chapter in it called Annie's Story. And unfortunately, my mother couldn't talk to her sister about her involvement since Annie had passed away several years before in December 2003. It was then in November 2002 that my aunt responded to an email that Robert Satloff posted on harissa.com, which is an online site for Sephardic Jews from North Africa. And it asked whether anyone knew of an Arab that had saved any Jews during the German occupation of Tunisia during World War II. My aunt answered him and let him know she had a story to tell about our family being saved by an Arab man. As Satloff was in Morocco during research, he hired an interviewer to record her testimony in October 2003, just before my aunt passed away. And she described what happened to her family when the German army invaded Tunisia in November 42, and the German SS arrived in Mahdia, a small port and fishing town. And it didn't take long before they were evicted from their home so the SS could board their troops. My grandfather, Jacob Boukris, who had a gas station representing Standard Oil, arranged for them to stay at an olive oil factory along with the Uzan extended family members. Several weeks later, Khaled Abdul Wahab, whose father was a close friend of my grandfather, showed up one night at the factory and told my grandparents that it was too risky to stay there and that they should leave with him immediately to his farm. Well, Khaled explained to them that a German officer he knew told him that he had his eyes on a certain very attractive woman, and he wanted her for her own pleasure as soon as the very next day. Well, that description of that woman made Khaled realize it was Odette Boukris, my grandmother, who was in danger from this German officer and possibly even the rest of the family. So Khaled insisted that the families come to his farm in Tlalsa, about 20 miles away from Mahdia, for their safety. He ended up shuttling them, all the families and their belongings, through the night to his farm, where they all stayed until the end of the German occupation in May of 1943. Now, at this time, my aunt actually didn't know why Khaled had come to bring the families to his farm. She only found out later from her parents about the danger they were potentially facing back then. It was this testimony of my aunt and further research by Robert Satloff that Khaled Abdul Wahab's name was submitted to the Department for the Righteous at Yad Vashem for consideration for the title of Righteous Among the Nations. Now, after meeting Satloff at an event at the Simon Wiesenthal Center on Holocaust Remembrance Day in Los Angeles in April of 2007, an email conversation kind of got started with my mother and him with my involvement. Eventually, this led to her own testimony being prepared due to Satloff's documentary of Among the Righteous that aired on PBS, April 2010. My mother became another witness to the Khaled story following her cousin Edme Yuzon Meslia, who you saw in the little clip that Emmanuel showed, who Satloff found in Paris while searching for other family members. Edme was part of the documentary of Satloff's documentary, the documentary that Satloff made, and revisited Khaled's farm in Tlalsa with Satloff to talk about her experience there. Now remember, this was a documentary that was done in 2010. She revealed another act of bravery by Khaled that involved some drunken officers. My mother's later testimony as a witness actually corroborated Edme's story. And if you bear with me, I'll explain what happened in just a little later. So my mother's memory of her early years in Mahdia was one of a very happy environment. She could only remember good times of her youth. For her, Mahdia was a melange of different people and cultures: Arabs, Maltese, French Catholics, and Jews, all living in harmony. And being a small town, she had friends across the spectrum of the population. As for her education, my mother went to an Italian school as a kindergartner and then a French school from then on. She had an observant home life with Shabbat dinners and celebrated Jewish holidays with family and friends. She recalled that time of her life as a happy and wonderful one until the Germans invaded Tunisia and the SS troops showed up in Mahdia. Her first encounter with the occupation was in December 1942, when the SS came to her home to confiscate all the radios and to hand out the infamous yellow stars that Jews had to wear. Now, the sounds of the SS boots marching in the streets of Mahdia was a sound she would never forget. Not long after, their home was taken over by the SS to board some troops and used as sort of a mess hall. My mother also remembers having to move to the olive press factory and after several weeks being swept away to Khaled's farm. And like her sister, she too did not know the reason why he was taking them to his farm, other than for their general safety. Once on the farm, from what I was told, the families lived in two very long and narrow rooms in stables, just wide enough to have beds, but put side by side with curtains taking the place of doors. But regardless of the accommodations, my mother and other family members felt safe until one night, danger kind of struck. My mother's testimony submitted to Yad Vashem in April 2010 tells what happened that night, and I'd like to share what she wrote with you. While we were at Tellelsa, a German regiment camp nearby Khaled's farm, they were mostly German Red Cross. There were also some higher-ranking German officers there too. I do not think they were connected to the same groups of soldiers who were in control in Mahdia. Khaled sometimes entertained these German officers at his house on the farm. He did this in his house, which was at the opposite side of the farm from the stables. We always kept in our rooms when there were Germans anyway on the farm. I remember one particular frightening incident that happened at Tellelsa. One night at about 2 a.m., 2 or 3 Germans who had drunk too much showed up in the courtyard outside the door to our room and started shouting for us. They said they knew there were Jews in the room and were coming to get us. My grandmother immediately started screaming, "Cachez les filles, hide the girls." I remember being shoved under the bed and forced to hide under a blanket. My older uncle, too older for forced labor, went to the doorway to try to speak to the Germans. Thankfully, just at that moment, Khaled arrived. Somehow, he managed to lead the Germans away. He prevented a terrible disaster. The next morning, Khaled came to our room. He apologized to all of us, our family and the Yuzans, for what happened the night before. He said he would make it sure it never happened again. It did not. We remained safe and secure until the occupation came to an end. Well, once the German army was gone, my mother and family returned to Mahdia and their home to restart their lives. And later on, Khaled would come to visit them on various occasions, as my Aunt Annie recounted. Unfortunately, as we know, Khaled was never granted the title of Righteous Among the Nations from Yad Vashem. And this was despite my Aunt Annie's testimony being the first for an Arab Muslim from North Africa to be even considered by Yad Vashem. And then there was a second round of testimonies from cousin Edme and my mother that came several years afterwards. My mother described Khaled as a wonderful man. He was kind, generous, and compassionate. And on top of that, he had the courage to help and protect 23 Jews, 12 adults, and 11 children during these difficult times. She and the families were very thankful for what he had done. And because of Khaled, my mother and the rest of the family were given a chance to have a future. And I say that because things could really have gone disastrously wrong at the olive factory, with the German officer wanting my grandmother a debt for his pleasure, or at the Khaled's farm when the drunken German officers came for the Jews in the stables. Consequently, the future for my mother led to her meeting my father at a Purim party in Tunis. She was a member of the Betar youth movement. He was a member of the British Royal Air Force. Unfortunately for me, a romance developed over a period of 2 years that became a wedding engagement in 1946 and a marriage in 1947. And I happened to come along in December of that year. I then spent 3.5 years growing up in Mahdia in my grandparents' home, along with my parents and my great-grandmother, until I got on a plane with my mother and father on our way to America in 1951. So, the conclusion of this story resulted in the survival and continuation of our family into this century and hopefully beyond. And speaking for our family, Khaled Abdul Wahab was the righteous man we needed. Thank you. And now I pass it on to Mordechai.
Thank you, Saul, for that very moving story. I will speak about what happened with Yad Vashem. How come Yad Vashem stubbornly and obnoxiously refuses to recognize Khaled? It has to do with the question of risk. The basic criterion for a person to be honored as a righteous among the nation, the basic criterion is, as it states in the law, the Knesset law, they risk their lives. Samu nafsham b'chapam. They risk their life. So the big question is, what sort of risk are we talking about? So let me start to say that, first of all, we are talking of a country that was under direct German occupation for at least 6 months. German troops moved in. First slide. There you see German soldiers in Tunisia. And on the right, Jewish men immediately, they had to wear the star. I remember in the old Yad Vashem Museum, and I was already there, we had some photos of Jews wearing the star, the yellow star in Tunisia. Men were drafted for forced labor. Why forced labor? Well, the war was going on. The Germans in Tunisia had to face on one side the British army on the south, and on the north and the west was the United States Army, which, as Emmanuel Barabi already mentioned, the United States and the United States forces landed in Morocco and Algeria, and they moved in. So the Germans were hemmed in by these powerful forces. They held back for a few months, and finally in May 1943 they gave up and they surrendered. So there wasn't an occupation, and there were around 50 or 60,000 Jews in Tunisia, as was described, and then there were SS people that came in together with the German military, and one of the SS commanders, a man very notorious, Walter Rauff. He is the man that invented the German gas vans. The vans were Jews in Poland, in a place called Chelmno, were forced into a van, and the pipe which leads the gas outside was directed into the van. The van was locked, and the people were gassed inside trucks. People were gassed to death. They were taken to a forest, and there they were buried. This is known as the Chelmno. In Chelmno, tens of thousands of Jews. So he was in charge of that, Walter Rauff, SS commander. He later on moved to Chile, and he died there. So he came to Tunisia to plan the deportation of the Jews to the across the Mediterranean to Poland, to the concentration camps. In fact, some Jews from Tunisia did wind up in the camps. In fact, even a few Jews from Libya, too, did wind up in concentration camps. So there was a potential danger. Now, Yad Vashem claimed that the Jews in Tunisia were not at risk of their lives. Why? Because there were no concentration camps in Tunisia, and no one was deported, except, for a few people. But the mass of the Jewish population was not deported. So the Jews faced no risk of their lives. And what Khaled did, very meritorious, and we have to honor him, he faced no risk to his own life, because in Europe, people who were sheltering Jews, they faced the risk of being arrested, and they themselves to suffer the same fate of the Jews, that is, being deported to concentration camps. And this didn't happen in Tunisia. So the case, the story of Khaled Abdul Wahab, as beautiful as it is, does not fit in within that basic criteria of risk to one's life. Now, in 2007, I was about to leave Yad Vashem. They had enough of me for 24 years, and they decided to put me out to grass. It was about time. I was then 70 years old. And then I met this very interesting person, Robert Satloff. Now, not much was mentioned about Satloff here, but Robert Satloff is an important person. He has an office in Washington, D.C., called the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, where he has conferences, he has guests to talk about what's happening in the Middle East. So Robert Satloff came to me and he showed me the book that he wrote, Among the Righteous, and he said, I have a candidate for the title of Righteous Among the Nations. At that time, I was about to retire. I was still heading the Department of the Righteous Among the Nations. I have to say a few words about that department. We receive requests by people to honor their rescuers. Most of the requests, almost all of them come from Europe, and a great portion come from Poland, from Ukraine, from Germany, from France, and so forth, Holland, Belgium. And I'm dealing with that. Very rarely do we get any request from Tunisia of somebody having been saved by a Tunisian, and the Tunisians are Arabs. So I want to mention here in parentheses, we did honor Muslims already, but Muslims that were living in Albania and in Bosnia, especially Albania. And I was very much involved in getting the stories from Albania out. So Albania is a Muslim country. 80%, 85% of Albanians are Muslims. The rest are Christians. But they're not Arabs, but they're Muslims. So we did honor Muslims. So there was no prejudice at Yad Vashem against Muslims. Okay, so that claim can be discounted. But the problem of risk. So I invited Robert Satloff to come to Yad Vashem, and he showed a film about the story of Khaled and the story of Tunisia. And I have to tell you, at Yad Vashem, they know very little about North Africa, about Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria. Most of the people at Yad Vashem are the people in command, the people in the top brackets. They're survivors from Europe, and a heavy proportion of them come from Poland. So everything they try to judge by comparing it to what happened in Poland, because Poland was the worst place during the Holocaust, the gas chambers, the concentration camps, the anti-Semitism there, the killings on the streets of Jews. So if you try to compare that to Tunisia, then the Tunisian story is not something to talk about. So that's a big problem that we don't have at Yad Vashem. We didn't have any historians, reputable historians, to talk about the occupation, the 6 months occupation in Tunisia, which could have led, had the Germans not been defeated. Tunisia is the first place where the Germans were defeated in World War II. Okay, in May 1943, when the Germans surrendered in Tunisia, they were still in command over almost all of Europe in May 1943. So the war was not over. But for the Jews of Tunisia, it was over. They were safe. So, since the question of risk, so a lot of people interpreted risk is that a person comes out and says, I am saving the Jews, and what are you going to do about it? And they arrest him, and they shoot him, or they put him in a concentration camp. But, of course, people who saved Jews, they didn't announce that. They didn't publish that in newspapers. It was a secret thing. And the rescuers in many countries in Europe did not know what would happen to them exactly if what they did was uncovered, whether they would go to a concentration camp, or they would be arrested, or they would be slapped on their hands and sent home and said, don't do that again. They didn't know it, but there was a potential risk. Now, who makes the decision at Yad Vashem, who is the righteous among the nations? Yad Vashem administration? No. There was a special board called the committee or commission of the righteous among the nations. In that commission, about 20 to 25 members, they are all outsiders. They're not Yad Vashem workers. Most of them are survivors from Europe. The commission is headed by a retired Supreme Court justice with whom I worked very closely. My job was to present the cases which I felt justified a debate before the commission. So I placed it on the agenda. I had the commission meet once every month or month and a half, and I gave my opinion, and then there was a debate by the commission, and the commission decided by majority vote whether to accept the story for the honor of righteous among the nations or not. Okay, so, and then the commission decides, chaired by a judge of the Supreme Court, and then Yad Vashem carries out the decision of that commission. Now I must say, I don't like to brag about myself, but I had a certain voice in the commission which carried a lot of weight. Okay, a lot of weight. So when it came to a vote, people asked for my opinion, the members of the commission, and in many cases, I had a third of the commission members accept my opinion, and they voted in what I recommended. But the problem is, when this came before the commission, I was already no longer at Yad Vashem.
Mm-hmm.
I had already retired. And I said to Satloff, if I had been still there, I can guarantee to you, based on my work with this commission for 24 years, and based on my close contact with the judge who headed the commission, who had a high regard for my opinion, I can guarantee you that Khaled would have been declared a righteous among the nations. But I was no longer there. And at Yad Vashem, they have this tradition. Anyone who leaves Yad Vashem, we simply strike him out. We don't talk to him. We don't ask his opinion. He's out. He's no longer there. So I was treated like an outcast simply because I had left. Nothing wrong with me. And so, but still, I was so moved by the story of Khaled, I said to Satlev, let's not give up. Let's carry this to, and let's go on. So I even published an article in the Jerusalem Post. Let's see. Okay, that's my article in Jerusalem Post criticizing Yad Vashem, and that infuriated Yad Vashem. How does this man, Mordechai Paldiel, who worked at Yad Vashem for 24 years, take Yad Vashem to task? He should be supporting Yad Vashem from the outside. And what I claimed is that the head, one of the judges that headed the commission, Moshe Beisky, who was a survivor and he was saved by Oskar Schindler, he interpreted the criterion of risk as potential risk, not that the person was standing in front of a hangman. He was about to be hanged because he sheltered Jews. But there was a potential risk that a person could be severely punished for what he was doing to Jewish people. And we honored many people in France, especially during the period of the Vichy regime, that sheltered Jews, although they didn't face any immediate risk in case they were arrested for sheltering Jews. But there was a potential risk that they could wind up in a prison in France, okay? So Justice Beisky, the head of the commission, said that these cases are acceptable, even if there's a potential risk of harm, a potential risk that if you shelter Jews, you would be harmed in one way or another, although not necessarily you would immediately lose your life. That is acceptable. And that was the policy at the commission. But Justice Beisky had left, and there was another judge. I also got along very fine with him, but I was no longer at Yad Vashem. And so the struggle that me and Robert Sadler kept down with Yad Vashem, and Yad Vashem kept saying there was no risk for the Jews, so there was no risk for Khaled. He sheltered in on his farm. And the proof is that there was a German unit from the Red Cross across from the farm, and they visited Khaled, and they knew that there were Jews there, and nothing happened. Okay? My response was, why did Khaled have to take 23 women and children out from Mahdia at night, take them on a long trip to his farm if there was no risk of these Jews, that nothing would happen to them? Why did he have to do that? Because these 23 women and children, and including one old person, was too old to be taken for forced labor, because they were at a risk of certain harm that would happen because one of the Germans was attracted to one of the women or whatever. And he said, you have to get out immediately from that oil press factory, disaffected oil press factory, where they had been taken, where they were forced to live. And to take them on a long trip, 23 miles, to a certain farm, and to be kept there until the end of the war there in Tunisia. So there was a risk of something could happen to these women, mostly women, and their children. So that fits in with the interpretation of potential risk. Now, Yad Vashem says, well, he took them there, but there was no risk to himself. There was no law, and the Germans did not publish any law saying it's forbidden to shelter Jews. Well, there was no such law in France too. Not everywhere where the Germans came, they actually and in Poland, yes, in Poland they had on the billboards, anyone who shelters Jews is punished with a death sentence. That was in Poland. That was in Lithuania. It was not in France. It was not in Belgium. Okay, there was no such law, but everybody knew that if you shelter a Jew, you're liable to get in trouble either with the Germans or with the Vichy regime. And getting in trouble with them, with the police and something, who knows what could happen to you. There was a potential risk of harm to yourself. So I made this argument in the Jerusalem Post article. Anyway, Shatlaff spoke to this person and that person, to high bracket persons. And finally, Yad Vashem and Shatlaff agreed that they were going to take it to another justice, Theodore Orr, a justice of the Supreme Court, who had already retired, as an arbitrator. And he was going to arbitrate the case. Very unusual for Yad Vashem to agree to that. And Theodore Orr didn't want to harm Yad Vashem's name. Don't forget, you do everything and you don't cause any harm to the name and the prestige of Yad Vashem, okay? And that is until today. So he wrote his opinion, and he said in his opinion, okay, that there was a potential danger of their lives, of these Jewish, of women. There was a potential danger. Potential, that's the word. And there were deportation plans for the Jews. So it's not like they were in Pollyanna, someplace, in Hawaii on Waikiki Beach. No, there was that potential thing. So he agreed with us. But then he left it for Yad Vashem to make the final decision. In the meantime, Shatlaff had the congregation where he is a member in Washington to make a ceremony and to honor Khaled. And I was invited. So I was there in 2008. While this thing was still debated by Yad Vashem, the congregation invited Nadia Bijayu. She's one of the daughters of one of the women that was on the farm of Khaled, and Khaled's own daughter, Khaled Abdul Wahab. And a tree was planted in the congregation on the garden, and I was there. And this was in 2008, while this thing was still being debated between me, Shatlaff, and Yad Vashem. My time has run out. There's something more I want to say, and I'll say it in my concluding remarks. Thank you. So now I turn the floor over to whom? To Olivia?
That's it. Wow, what an important story. And there are questions in the chat box. I don't think we'll get to all that many, but we'll get to some. Right now, I'm going to make some brief announcements. Then we'll get to your questions and final remarks. So I just want to tell you about our 2 upcoming programs. In 2 weeks' time, we are having a book launch. We are having a celebration of this new book. It's called Resisting Nazism. It's by Luke Berryman. And what's interesting about this book is it doesn't just look at the Nazi period, the 12-year period from 33 to 45. It actually looks at Nazism from 1920 until our present day, a 100-year period, and how people have resisted that ideology for the past 100 years. So it's quite an interesting lens on resistance. It's a free program, so tell all your friends. And we're putting a link in the chat box for how you can order the book in advance if you wish to do so. I hope you will sign up. Now, 2 weeks after that, April 12th, we are featuring the monumental story of Raoul Wallenberg. In all these 6 years of doing these programs, we've never yet featured Raoul Wallenberg. There's a brand new film. And and it centers on what happened to Wallenberg after his disappearance. So if you have questions about what happened to him, you will want to see this film. It's not yet out in theaters. It's barely out in the film festival circuit. So this is really a rare opportunity to see this very important film on Raoul Wallenberg. And now we're going to show you a little clip on this film.
There was nothing in his background that would have marked him as one of the great heroes of the 20th century.
What he did, what he accomplished, was of biblical proportion.
Raoul Wallenberg rescued as many as 100,000 Hungarian Jews.
Only to be arrested on Stalin's orders and disappeared without a trace.
We are not forgetting about this case and will continue our efforts.
Wallenberg's life is a challenge to us all to live those virtues of empathy and compassion, even when it involves great risk.
Do you think Raoul Wallenberg is still alive?
I have wondered about that.
I think we'll ever know.
Oh, no. No.
So I hope you will sign up for these programs and our programs to come. So now to get to your questions, there are a lot of questions about Yad Vashem, why they haven't honored him. So Mordechai, that's what you've been discussing. I don't know if there's anything further that individuals can do, that we as an organization can do to help persuade Yad Vashem to change their mind. Mordechai?
Okay. Yes, anything can be done. I remember while I was still in Israel at Yad Vashem, all the pundits said, the Soviet Union will last forever. Communism, it will never disappear. And then one day it collapsed like a house of cards and communism disappeared. Okay? Anything can happen in history. Anything can happen. And I think that the Khaled Wahab case can be recuperated and restored, and it can be done. But it's not going to happen by itself.
Right.
So therefore, I think now that I'm sitting here in front of my computer and I'm trying to think, how can this be done? I am a persona non grata at Yad Vashem because I took them to task for this. So I am really an enemy of Yad Vashem, although I'm not. I praise Yad Vashem. I worked at Yad Vashem. I had thousands and thousands of people honored as righteous among the nations while I was at Yad Vashem. I was very much involved in that. But I think in this case, it's you, Saul Weisel, the family. You told a very beautiful story, and you tell it very well. You're a very articulate person. You and Robert Setloff. Robert Setloff has already raised his hands. I give up. He led on a struggle for many years, very courageous struggle. And but that's very sad. We have to get him involved. And you as a member, as the son of one of these women that were saved by Khaled Abdul Wahab, you somehow have to get involved. And maybe if you know somebody in the New York Times, maybe your mother wrote an op-ed in the New York Times at that time, and Yad Vashem was forced to respond and explain, we are studying the case and so on. But when something happened in the New York Times, Yad Vashem has to respond. So something can be done. And you have my participation. Because I strongly believe
Emmanuel in his film also, right?
And Emmanuel, of course, in film. You too, because you are Tunisian. I mean, you're a descendant of Tunisians. You live in Tel Aviv. Now, the claim was those who criticize Yad Vashem is because Khaled is an Arab. That's why. No, that's not true. I mean, it's not because he's an Arab. That's why. But it's the people on the commission. They don't know the story of Tunisia. They don't know. They compare it to Europe. And if it doesn't meet up to the standards of Europe, especially Eastern Europe, where Jews were shot on the streets, left and right, then they don't understand why Yad Vashem has to bother with a story. A beautiful story, no doubt, but it doesn't meet up to the standards, and that would accord the righteous title. So
Emmanuel, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I got an idea, Mordechai. Let's do a documentary about it. I think that
why not?
What's missing in our film, which is a short documentary, unfortunately, because many consequences, and it's just by chance. We had a chance to do it, so it's a short documentary. But I think what's missing in the film is your testimony.
Okay, so
wrap it
Emmanuel,
up.
how about doing a documentary and have it shown at the Cinematheque? The Cinematheque in Israel, they show a lot of films about the, historical films. So let's do a Cinematheque film, show it at the Cinematheque in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, about this story of Khaled Abdul Wahab. And have the public in Israel respond to that, give their opinion, okay, about this thing, because we simply cannot raise our hands and give up and say, too bad, nothing can be done.
Right. Let's do it.
That would be an insult to both the family of Khaled and to the survivors, to the family of the survivors, that Yad Vashem has rejected his nomination.
So, Emmanuel, I'm going to turn to you for whatever final thoughts you would like to make today.
Sure, yes. It's always amazing to hear Mordechai. I truly believe that we should go tell the story again and in a bigger way, and to add Mordechai's point of view to the film. And I think that many things that he mentioned, especially the comparison between Poland and Eastern Europe and North Africa, is also the reason why it was not told by the people themselves. My family, other families, they felt shame to say we, with our little story, comparing to what happened in Poland, we had nothing. Everything was okay. And it was like this for years and years and years, until the second generation started asking questions. And my cousin, he's a researcher and historian. He's doing exactly that in Israel. And he wrote entire book about it. So he knows also Satloff very well. So I think that we should do it also in order to tell the story of the German occupation in North Africa and everything that happened there, even if it's not similar at all, luckily, to what happened in Poland or other places in Europe.
Yes. Emmanuel, I spoke to Nissim Zvili on the phone. Nissim Zvili told me that he, as a child, and his parents were sheltered by a Tunisian family. He doesn't remember the names. His parents are no longer alive. Now, Nissim Zvili was a top political figure in Israel. He was Israeli ambassador to France. And
I know Nissim very well.
Hashem honored Frenchmen. He was the one who made the ceremonies and handed out the honors to the French rescuers. He's old now, I don't know, but he himself, as a child, was sheltered by a Tunisian family, but he doesn't recall the name. So I spoke to Nissim Zvili, so maybe you can have another little talk with Nissim Zvili. I think he lives in the Tel Aviv region. And there are many, many Tunisians in Israel that should get involved in the story of Khaled.
So, Saul, what would you like to say today in closing to our audience?
Well, today, what I wanted to add on to the presentation I was making was the fact that the immigration to America did not end with my family, with just my mother, my father, and myself. We were fortunate enough that my grandparents actually immigrated to the United States and joined us just about when my sister was born in 1957. So I had my grandmother Odette, my grandfather Jacob, and then even my great-grandmother was able to come a little bit later after she left. She went from Tunisia to France, as did my grandparents, and then came here. So again, you had the family being able to continue on and join us with my mother and her sister Ani as well, with her daughter Nadia and her son Marco also were able to immigrate at a certain point. So to me, that kind of says everything, right? You know, we were able to be a family together once again, because of ultimately because of what Khaled did for our families.
Mordechai, there was a testimonial of Saul's mother, Eva, that you wanted to mention, so go ahead.
Okay, so I want to mention simply a few words of what Eva wrote to the New York Times in 2011. She says, 69 years after pinning a yellow star to my breast in my native land, I know that I was able to enjoy a long, full life because Abdul Wahab confronted evil and saved me, as he saved other fortunate members of my family. I hope that Yad Vashem recognizes his case before no one is left to tell his story. End of quotation. So your mother was a very courageous woman, Saul, and she has passed on the baton to you. And you have my support, and you have Emmanuel's support, and we can do something about it. We can turn it around.
Wonderful.
Everything is possible.
Thank you all. Thank you to our wonderful speaker. This has been a fascinating hour. I'm so happy to shine a spotlight on somebody who deserves to be better known. Hope you'll all join us in 2 weeks' time for Resisting Nazism, and then on April 12th for this amazing film on Raoul Wallenberg with a discussion. Mordechai will be back for that. And we have also the daughter of Congressman Tom Lantos, who was the only Holocaust survivor ever to serve in the U.S. Congress. He himself was rescued by Raoul Wallenberg. So you won't want to miss it, and I hope to see you all soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. Be well.